All right, so we have left off, I'm told, on page 48, first full paragraph. We're in the chapter 4, we agnostics, we're discussing step 2. And some of the information we've already covered in the first few pages here that we find pertinent is on page 45, first full paragraph. First sentence, it says, lack of power. That was our dilemma. That's our problem. Everything that we learn in the first step tells us what? That we are powerless over alcohol. What does that mean? We're powerless over alcohol. We're powerless to quit and stay quit because of the insanity, the mental illness. And when we start drinking, we are powerless over being able to control the amount we take because of the physical allergy. So in two different forms, we're powerless. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. So it says that we're going to need to find a power. And obviously, since we're beyond human aid and I am human, it says here, it's going to need to be a power greater than ourselves, right? Power greater than human power. And then it says, but where and how are we to find this power? Where are we to find it? Next sentence says, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Now, Pat had read in the first edition this morning that the main purpose of the book is to show other alcoholics precisely how we recovered. That's the main purpose. The main object we're finding here is to find a power greater than yourself that can solve your problem, that can relieve our insanity. So that's what we're looking for here. And it says power greater than ourselves. So we know on the next page, 46, they got into telling us, last full paragraph, said that much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect contact with him. That's it. It says, as soon as we admitted the possible existence of this power greater than ourselves, that underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed with a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard of terms to those who seek him, reminding us again that if we are to find God, we are the ones that are going to be doing the seeking. We're the ones that are going to have to be doing that work. We get into page 47, and they start talking about, and they even talk about on 46, a little bit about prejudice, this prejudice. And I wonder if I have that, in this book. So get this. Prejudice, and I don't have this on my definition sheet on the website, but I'm going to need to add this because it's important. It keeps talking about don't let prejudice get in your way, right? Prejudice is defined as an adverse opinion or leaning formed without just grounds or before sufficient knowledge. Just having an opinion on something, steadfast in it without having sufficient information or without even just grounds. Just, I don't want to hear about it. That's what prejudice is. It's closed-mindedness, right? We are dead set in the way that we feel. And it warns us about that. On 46, we found as soon as we're able to lay aside the prejudice and even express a willingness to believe in God greater than ourselves, we commence to get results. Don't even have to believe in God. Just be willing. Just be willing to have an open mind to it, right? And then it goes again on to page 47. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean. Do not form that opinion without sufficient information. At least get the information. Then if you want to form your opinion, then that's fine. But ask yourself what this stuff means. Then we got the directions on page 47. If you don't have anything else underlined up to this point, I would definitely underline this because this is our directions for step 2. And it's the second full paragraph on 47. And again, just like the first step was to determine whether we're an alcoholic, which is just a question. Am I an alcoholic? We learned what it is. Am I one? Question. Question 2 for step 2, the question is, we needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? Do I believe, or am I even willing to believe? And I think we discussed a little bit before about what that meant as willing, because I just go back to when I had learned this information from my mentor, and this was brought up, and I did not have even a limited conception of God. It was just, I don't know, it's probably something, but I have no idea. So do I believe? No. So now the next part of that, to qualify to be done with step two, is am I willing to believe? Well, what does that mean? What does the action take to be willing to believe? What is willing to believe? What does that mean? In scope, how do I know if I'm willing to believe? I couldn't understand how you do that. How do I be willing? How do I know if I'm willing? And it was put to me this way. You asked me to mentor you. I'm going to tell you that I was as sick, if not sicker than you. I recovered, and I'm going to tell you God did that. It's God of my understanding. You can get your own understanding. I've seen many people do it. In the book, it shows us many people got their own understanding of God. All different. But that power had relieved them of their alcoholism. You haven't found a solution. So to be willing to believe is this. Are you beat up enough that you're willing to at least try to do the process to become recovered, which should happen by the time you're midway through step 9? Could happen well before that. But are you willing to try it and see if it works? Then you can be the judge if there's a God or not. You'll have sufficient knowledge. You can walk through and say, in the next chapter, chapter 5 says, rarely does anyone fail if they thoroughly follow our path, right? So thoroughly follow the path, do it diligently if you're willing. And if you fail, then you're either one of those rarities or maybe there's just no God. Or you be the judge, or you may recover. Are you willing? How bad are you hurting? Do you think you might have another way out? Because that's what brings us to the point of this willingness they talked about when we get to the top of page 48. They talk about this handicap. That's the thing that's going to limit us from being able to move forward in recovery. It says we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice, all meaning the same thing and all really based on ego, right? Handicap, we will be mentally disabled because we're not going to get the information. If we have this obstinacy, I don't want to hear about God, sensitiveness, this unreasoning prejudice, that's going to handicap you. You're not going to be able to get any further without it. So as many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. I would underline that. Whenever I read something that sounds like a must, and there's many different synonyms for the word must, but when they say had to be, that would be a must, right? That sort of thinking, that prejudice, it has to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Well, you're like me, you might have had a hell of a time casting aside such feelings. Because, I argued about religion with people many, many times for a long time, for many years. But it says here, many of us might have resisted, but we didn't find great difficulty in casting aside the feelings. Why? Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we tried to be on other questions. So in this respect, but underline, alcohol is the great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. So if you have this prejudice, that's the question to self. Are you going to be willing? It depends. Have you been beaten to a state of reasonableness to where you're open-minded? Because if not, and you already admitted that you're an alcoholic, and according to this book, you're going to die in that condition. Have you been beat up enough? That's kind of a pre-qualification for it, huh? All right, so where we left off is the next paragraph. It says, the reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think that there are good reasons. So let us have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. Before I go much further, I just want to also highlight this whole chapter, what this really is about. This isn't about forcing you or trying to get you or persuade you to believe in anything. This whole chapter is about just asking yourself some questions. Are you willing to look at this and get some information and then decide for yourself? That's all that this is about. So let's look at the reasoning that he's talking about here. And we're talking about facts and results. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur or doubt. Why this readily acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, what we feel, what we direct and use without a reasonable assumption at a starting point. So what does that mean? Well, I'm not an electrician, but I have every bit of confidence when I walk into this room and hit that light switch that turns these lights on, and I know it does because it always had when I hit it. I don't have a murmur of question in my mind that it's going to turn on. Actually, I'd be shocked if it didn't. It's be a breaker or something, right? But it always does. Now, I don't see the electricity flowing, right? I don't see how it works. So I have no visual proof that this is actually happening, but they tell me that it's electricity that moves through and lights us up, and that's how it works. And we readily accept it, no problem. Don't understand it, can't even see it, yet we accept it, right? So everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder. So that's a mouthful. A prosaic steel girder. What the hell is that? A prosaic steel girder is nothing more than an I-beam used for, building construction. It's just an I-beam. The prosaic steel girder, it's a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there's an all-powerful guiding creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, prejudice. And we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Boy, was that me. Where our contention's true, well, then it would follow that life originated out of nothing, that life means nothing, and that life proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists choose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice. We get this about prejudice. This is like the fourth or fifth time they've mentioned that word in here. And now what are they saying about it? We beg you, because we know it's going to handicap you. We beg you to lay aside this prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of these various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and has given direction to millions, today billions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices. We might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability. They were demonstrating a degree of happiness, and they were demonstrating a degree of usefulness, which we should have sought ourselves. What were we demonstrating? Well, according to the doctor, we were demonstrating a degree of restlessness, a degree of irritability, and a degree of unhappiness. Stability, happiness, and usefulness. Isn't that what we're looking for? Yeah. Top of 50. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation, right? Criticizing the messenger. We talked of intolerance. Well, we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality of the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. Underline, that is prejudice. Never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing, just to learn about it. In our personal stories, okay, now they're going to tell us what the second portion of the book's about. We know we're studying the first portion, right? How to recover. Second portion is personal stories. And they're telling us here now, in our personal stories, this is what you're going to find there. A wide variation in which each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. That's the point of those personal stories, to understand the approach and the conception that others got for God. Even though we don't need to consider another person's approach. That's the purpose. So whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself, which is why we don't study it. It's an individual, it's a personal matter. It's an outside issue. It's an outside issue. We're here to learn to recover, not about everybody's different conception of God. This is going to create more prejudice, if nothing else, right? And it does. If you think about it, how many of you have been around AA for a while and said to me where you get this, these different, I don't know if I want to call it a religious fanatic, but an uninformed individual sitting in my higher power, his name is Jesus Christ, and he saved me, and blah, 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 and that's fine. Tells us here, that's fine, right? But it's an individual matter. It's a personal matter. It is an outside issue. And if we're here to help other people, and if somebody is stating that they have a higher power that's done something for them, so obviously they've probably recovered, we're not here to push that off on somebody else because that is a conception that worked for you. That is a personal matter, right? So no matter how strong our convictions are, the warning's here, and we're going to see it in the later chapters as well. That is to you. This is almost like a spiritual kindergarten, getting your own conception of God, however limited it may be. It will grow from there. And as we continue to grow our spiritual experience, as we continue to ask God for direction and listen to God and take action on what the direction he gives us in step 10 and 11 when we get there, if we're doing that every single day, how can we not get to know God better? How can we not continue to search and find out what the truth is for ourselves? We don't need another person's conception. The reality and the truth is going to come to us if we're doing this, and it will continue to grow. So I just wanted to set that straight. So on one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed of all religions. Okay, we're talking about religions. All these different religions, one thing that they're all agreed upon. Ain't much that all religions agree upon, but this is one thing they all agree upon. Every one of them has, one, gained access, and two, they believe in a power greater than themselves. And this power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let us look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. And every one of them, they flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves and to take a certain attitude towards that power and to do some certain things, simple things, this would be other steps, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. A revolutionary change in their living, in their thinking. Do you remember the story about Roland Hazard on page 20 something or another, maybe 22, I think it is? And when he was talking to Dr. Jung, and Dr. Jung said, basically, you're screwed. There's nothing I can do for you. Spent a year with him trying to get him to understand his alcoholism, but it didn't work. Told him he was going to die that way. And he said, is there any exception? Roland asked him. He said, well, yeah, there is. Said throughout history, every once in a while, so that's not like every couple of years, every once in a while throughout history is like every once in a great while, right? Every once in a while, here and there, alcoholics have had, he says, what are called spiritual experiences. And he describes those spiritual experiences as ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of these men's lives, are cast aside. And a new set of conceptions and motives dominate them. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes. A revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. What he was talking about and what they're talking about here is a spiritual experience. After they've come to believe, take a certain attitude towards that power, like depending on it, do some simple things. Then what has happened? They had a spiritual experience. That's what they're stating there. That's revolutionary change. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources, what did they find? A new power, a new peace, a new happiness, and a new sense of direction that flowed into them. That's what a spiritual experience looks like. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by the seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Ooh. We're not talking about the drink problem in step one now. We're talking about the second part, our lives being unmanageable. Why are we making a heavy going of life? Why is our life unmanageable? Leave aside the drink question. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason one should have faith. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men of those days were equal to the best of today. They're just as smart, and maybe smarter in some regards. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. Why is that? The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. I'd underline this: superstition, tradition, all sorts of fixed ideas. You know what they're talking about? It says their minds were fettered with it. They're talking about being prejudiced. You know, just think, even they don't mention it here, but when I think of that, I think about, like, we used to burn people at a stake in this country. We were burning witches. There's no doubt. As soon as somebody says, he's got a demon in him, burn her. Now, whether you saw it or not, you're burn. That's what everybody did, right? Superstition. That's the way it is. Our minds were fettered with it, and that may because we weren't investigating. So when they were talking about this idea of scientific inquiry, research, and invention, let's find out the reality of what's going on here. Don't want to hear about it, right? Fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round Earth preposterous. Others came to putting Galileo to death for his astronomical heresies. So we ask ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. It happened, and they were afraid to put that in print. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? They tried it for a very long time, and it just couldn't happen. Fixed ideas now, can't happen. It happened? We're to print that? Are we sure? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Yet only 30 years later, the conquest of air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday. This is interesting, because remember, this is 1939. This is before it happened. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he'll say, "Oh, I bet they do it. Maybe not so long either." We did it, right? All right. And you could put that in today's terms. How many people would think that I'm out of my mind to say in the next 50 years we may have flying cars? Possible? Or is our mind just fettered with superstition? Say, never happened, can't happen. No, we're open to anything now. We keep seeing material progress. Like you look at this cell phone. It is astounding what can be done with this thing. I can learn about anything going through Google. It does so many things. It's incredible. I have no idea how it works, but it is incredible. My mind is not closed to anything that we're able to accomplish with what we've seen. Just in my lifetime, what I've seen. It's incredible. And that's what they're talking about here. We're more open-minded today than they were then, and that's why we have more material progress. Is not our age characterized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new? Discard old ideas for new. Let's go back to the doctor. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of these men's lives, were tossed away to get a whole new conception. That's what they're talking about here. Our age is characterized by how easy it is to discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does. Anybody got a pager anymore? Nope. Anybody got 8-track tape? Nope. Well, maybe. Okay, some here and there. But we all know it's nostalgic, right? We know we have better stuff. We had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. Now, this next couple of sentences here, when we go back to what they were talking about, making a heavy going of life, which I described as being where our lives becoming unmanageable. Leave aside the drink question, the first part of that is power. Let's just talk about our lives being unmanageable. So if you want to know what qualifies me to say that my life is unmanageable, well, this is a part of the book that I see where they describe what an unmanageable, these are symptoms of an unmanageable life. And if you can say yes to even one of these, even one of them, that is a symptom of an unmanageable life. So ask yourself these questions as we go through them. I do this whenever I work with a new person. Step one, we were having troubles with our personal relationships. Anybody get here having troubles with their personal relationships? For most of us, that's number one problem going on, personal relationships. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. That one didn't apply to me, but it applies to many. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. How about just we were unhappy? We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. That's what brings us to AA. I did not come to AA because I thought, you know what? I think I've just drank too much, and I just don't think that I should drink anymore. I love drinking. I love the effect that it produced. Still did all the way up to the last day. Hated the ramifications from it. That's not why I came here. If I could find a way of living and continue to drink, I would have. No doubt in my mind. I came here because I couldn't stand the way I felt. And what they're talking about here is all these conditions in our lives, all this unmanageability. And many of us come to AA, and many in AA still believe, I got all these problems we just read because of my drinking. See, I drank and it made all these problems. Well, if that contention were true, then that means if you stopped drinking, all these problems were gone. So at any time that you tried quitting drinking without going through the recovery process, were those problems gone? I can tell you that I spent 16 years still going to AA, not recovered, didn't know anything about these directions, just stayed sober. And many of these things still existed very much so in my life. Very much so depressed, very much so had problems with my relationships. Sober is not the answer. That is not the answer. Because drinking is not the problem. So we couldn't be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these bedevilments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. Therefore, when we saw others solve their problem by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did, period. Strong statement. And this is why we have meetings. So the people who are recovered can sit here and say, we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon, look, I got well. Like that crap that we just read, that was going on, my life is not like that anymore. It doesn't resemble that one bit. My life is really good today. And if you're interested, I'll show you what I did, and maybe it'll happen to you too, because it'd be rare for it not to. In our experience, rarely does anyone fail to have that. They need to see that. Newcomers need to see that. And then the question goes back to our ideas did not work, but that God idea. If your idea worked, then I would ask you 10 years ago, 20 years ago, as you were planning out your life, was the plan to be sitting here in an AA meeting this morning? About this time in your life? Yeah. How's it working out for you? How's running life on self-will working out? That's where these problems are coming from. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment, the faith. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. Go back. How's it working out for you? When others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who had insisted their rights would never fly. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. This is one of man's magnificent attributes, this idea to reason, right? But what do we learn that prejudice is? It's getting this leaning or idea or conviction without sufficient knowledge. Now, you can't reason anything without having knowledge, both sides. Get the knowledge. We agnostically inclined, and didn't we talk about that? What does agnostic mean? Remember, the word Gnostic, old word, means knowledge, and you put the ag in front of it, that means without, or without knowledge. But of course, makes perfect sense. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell you why we think our present faith is more reasonable, why we think it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe. Why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, we don't know. Now, that's an agnostic. I just don't know. When we became alcoholics, I would underline this, crushed by a self-imposed crisis. Who caused our problems? Oh, we're going to learn more about that later. Self-imposed crisis. We could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that God is everything or else he is nothing. He's either everything or nothing. God either is or he isn't. What's your choice to be? You don't have to have a conception of him. But do you believe there's something there? He either is or he isn't. He's everything or he's nothing. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason towards the desired shore of faith. The outlines of the promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far. Notice that I put reason with a capital R. Kind of like we're using our reason as our God, right? But it only brought us so far. But somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we'd been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we didn't like to lose our support. That was natural. But let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Remember we talked about last week getting your own conception, and he said, generally none of us have a problem with our own conception of anything, right? You let me get my own conception, I'm good, right? If I don't have to, you're not pushing anything on me, I never have a problem with mine. That's what they're saying here. We have faith in our own reasoning and our ability to think. It's good enough for me. Yes, we had been faithful, abjectly faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. We found too that we have been worshipers. Ooh, what a state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshiped people, sentiment, things, money, ourselves? And then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Who of us have not loved something or somebody? And how much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last. Were not these things the tissues out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we've been living by faith and little else. Imagine life without faith, where nothing left but pure reason. It wouldn't be life. But we believed in life. Of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons, created out of nothing, meaning nothing, and whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seem to be more intelligent than that. At least so the chemist said. Hence, we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, though it emanate from our best minds. What about people who prove that man could never fly? Let me finish this last paragraph here. Yet we've been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. Remember, we're not talking about drinking. People who rose above their problems. And they said God made these things possible. And we only smiled. Isn't that what Bill did when Ebby said that? What happened to you? What happened to you, Ebby? You look great. I got religion. Okay, his ranting's going to go on. It's not going to last as long as the gin I got. I think was his came in. So we just smiled at it. We had seen spiritual release, but like to tell ourselves it wasn't true. So we're going to stop there for the day.